Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first live tasting of 2026. What a great way to start with the Infrequent Flyers with Alistair Walker. With a great, fantastic tasting last Friday live in Dumfries. Very entertaining, absolutely 8 fantastic whiskies. 7 malts and 1 grain whisky. But just as a little reminder for those of you who are members and have not purchased your festival tickets, tomorrow is the last day at the discounted price of £38. They are going to be £43 as of the 1st of March. So if you want to save yourself a fiver, then order your tickets online. You'll automatically get your discount. You'll obviously see that there is dates for the diary on your form, and there's also another tasting in October, which we're doing. I think it's the 19th and 23rd of October. We're doing some Tormore whiskey. So that'll be interesting. So sit back, fasten your seatbelts, put your seat in upright position, and enjoy the Infrequent Flyers with Alistair Walker. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce the aforementioned gentleman. Alistair, we've known each other for a few years.
Just a few, aye.
Just a few, aye. You've been to Dumfries before. I think it was twice, Alistair, prior
Yeah,
to
do you know what? It's funny.
week.
I had to double check that. So one of the things that came up when I was down doing the live tasting last week, I said one of the tastings stood out quite vividly because it was the night before Queen of the South played Rangers in the Scottish Cup final. And as I mentioned last week, I'm aware of the fact that Queen of the South do not reach the Scottish Cup final on a regular basis. But you I think it's happened once. But you suggested that it had been more than once, and actually I managed to check back, and you're right enough. I was also down in May of 2011. So the first time must have been just Benriach, and the second time would have been Benriach and Glendronach. So absolutely good memory.
Yep. You still haven't paid that bar bill, but anyway, that's
sounds about right.
No, it was a great tasting last week. Everybody that was coming in to pick the whiskey said it was most enjoyable. The stories, the whiskey, it was absolutely fantastic. So we'll just crack on if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got so, ladies and gentlemen, we have 8 whiskies as normal. There will be no break. If you have any questions, whatever, or any comments, please put them up for us. And Alistair will talk to you if you don't understand anything that he's saying about casks, etc., and finishes. Then feel free, because there might be 1 or 2 other people who are thinking the same thing. So let's get interactive with questions and answers, and we'll just sit back and enjoy this flight. I think it'll take about maybe 2 hours at the most before we land, but hopefully there'll be no air terminal, and
no turbulence.
No. Aye.
All right, thanks, Brian. Good evening, everybody. Very strange, this. Very different to last week when there was a whole crowd of people in front of me. And at the moment, I feel like I'm talking to myself like some sort of maniac. I have to apologise to Brian because he attended the tasting last week, and he's going to have to listen to my dubious banter one more time. So maybe a little bit of repetition there. So as Brian mentioned, we were doing 8 whiskies tonight. 8's quite a lot, I have to say. A lot of the tastings that we do tend to be 6 at a push 7. So 8's quite quite a challenge. But I hope you're all comfortable, and we'll get right into whiskey number one. And while we're tasting the whiskies, I'm going to tell you a little bit of my kind of background and my story in the whiskey industry, which goes back to, where did we start? 1997. So whiskey number one, which you can see on your screen there, and just to reinforce that, this is from Glenburgie, which is a Chivas Brothers distillery that's located kind of halfway between Elgin and Forres, up on the Moray Firth. It's a very good example of what we do with Infrequent Flyers and why the brand is called Infrequent Flyers. I knew when I started doing this back in 2018 that the ability to get casks was going to be the biggest challenge, certainly at that time. So I was aware of the fact that a lot of the whiskies that I would get access to wouldn't necessarily be the most famous names or the household names. Instead, it would be those whiskies that fly under the radar, the Infrequent Flyers. And Glenburgie is a great example. As I said earlier, it's owned by Chivas Brothers. It's very rarely seen as an official distillery release. The reason being that the bulk of what they produce, and they produce a lot, over 4 million litres of whiskey per annum, most of which is set aside to go into the Ballantine's blend. So it's kind of locked down for that one purpose. Hence, you don't see it so much as a single malt. And that's very much where the independent bottler, where their role becomes prominent. Our job really is to shine a light on those lesser known distilleries that aren't regularly bottled by the parent companies. What you'll notice tonight, as we go through these 8 whiskies, I have a terrible habit of messing about with the whiskies and changing them and putting them in different types of cask, tinkering. It's something that becomes quite addictive to independent bottlers. It's one of the few areas where we are able to actually put our fingerprint on the final product. So with this Glenburgie, we've taken the whiskey's been aged for 13 years. Most of that would have been in the original cask, which was probably a refill hogshead. And then I've taken that whiskey and finished it in a Languedoc French red wine cask for 4 years and 4 months. So you're taking the whiskey in a completely different direction. I should also add that everything that I release is bottled at natural cask strength. So this is coming in at 58.9%. Feel free to add a little bit of water as you see fit. So what first of the week, what you should really get from this, especially coming from the finish in the French red wine cask, is a lot of nice kind of fruit notes coming through. To me, this one's quite vibrant, quite tangy. There's a little bit of blood orange, a bit of cranberry. On top of that, you've got some nice kind of crushed digestive biscuit notes in there as well. But very much influenced by that almost 4.5 year period that it's spent in the red wine cask. Now, don't want to rush you in that one, so I'm going to take you a little bit back to the start of my journey. January 1997. Someone's asking, Tom Flory's asking, is the name Infrequent Flyers a parody on Frequent Flyers? 100%. It's I can't exactly remember how this popped into my head, but I've been trying to find I came up with what I thought were brilliant names, but whiskey names. And every time I came up with what I thought was a good name, I'd go and try and trademark it, and I found out that every good name I came up with was already registered to someone else. So I thought I'm going to have to go with something that's nothing to do with whiskey. Then you're going to get the trademark, no problem. And yeah, it was a little spin on the whole frequent flyers thing. The opposite, if you like, the road less travelled. So yeah, I hope that answers that one. But I was going to go back to the start. 1997. I'd just come out of university. I couldn't get a job. 21, 22 years old. Really no particular interest in whiskey at that time, bar the occasional foray with Jack Daniels. Not sure that qualifies. Anyway, as some of you might know, my old man's been involved in the industry for many years now. And at that time, he was working with a company called Burn Stewart Distillers out in East Kilbride. And he said to me, look, why don't you come and work for Burn Stewart just for a year? Then you'll get some experience, put that in your CV, and you can, after you've done that, you can go away and do something else. But it'll get you, get your foot on the ladder. That year turned into 6.5 years. Absolutely loved working in the industry, and I loved working for Burn Stewart. It was an interesting company, some great people, and it was at a time when the single malt category wasn't as well developed as it is today. We were very much a blended whiskey producer. We had our core brand was a product called Scottish Leader, which is still available today. But the key in the UK, we were really selling that into like social clubs and bowling clubs, old men's pubs. It was a good quality, affordable 3-year-old blend. In addition to that, we had 2 single malt distilleries, which were Tobermory and Deanston. And not because we saw an opportunity to build those as malt brands. It was more that we needed to have access to our own production, our own liquid, so that we could trade that with other distillers and then build up an inventory of different malts that you could use to create your blended Scotch whiskies. So a very different market to what we have today. And it's funny, I remember always when I'm telling the story about Scottish Leader, to give you an idea of what the game was back then, we actually, because of the customer base that we had, bowling clubs, bars, social clubs, we employed a couple of ex-football players to go and look after that side of the business for us. A guy called Joe Harper, who was really quite a famous footballer with Aberdeen, and another gentleman called Alex Willoughby, who played for Rangers. And so Joe's territory was Aberdeen, and Joe was very successful in selling Scottish Leader into the bars in Aberdeen. And Alex's territory was Glasgow. And Alec was quite successful at selling Scottish Leader into about 50% of the bars in Glasgow, but not so successful with the other 50%. You can see the obvious flaw in that strategy. But that was Burn Stewart. Worked there for 6.5 years, and then in 2003, that business was bought by Angostura, big rum producer from Trinidad, and they had a look at the business. My old man, who had worked at Burn Stewart at that time, he left the company. I left the company quite soon after, and I actually thought, right, okay, that was a really enjoyable 6.5 year period, and that's come to an end, and that's my time with whiskey finished. Better find something else to do. But unbeknownst to me, my dad was plotting away in the background looking to buy a distillery under his own steam. So come on and talk about that in a moment. But I'll maybe bring Brian in. Brian, what are your any thoughts on whiskey number one, the Glenburgie there?
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. It was a great starter to the evening last week, and it's a great starter tonight. How do you, when you say 4 years and 4 months, how often do you check the cask?
It's a good question.
I mean, did you just say, well, I'll leave it for once a year and just
probably not even as frequently as that. I like to give the whiskey a really good length of time in the cask, especially something like this, which is if you pour yourself a glass of Longwood red wine, it's a big, heavy, chunky red wine, but it is still a red wine. It's not like a fortified wine like a sherry or a port or a Moscatel. So it takes longer for the whiskey to draw out the flavors from the cask.
A bit more subtle.
Yeah, a bit more subtle. It's not as aggressive a finish, so you can easily get away with a long exposure to that type of wood. The other side is that these casks, forget the liquid cost, the actual cost of buying some of these empty casks, they're quite expensive. And being a typical Scotsman, you want to get your value for money. So you're leaving it in there for a good period, and try and draw as much as you can out of the cask. So typically, at least 2 years for most of them. Many of them will be much longer. Of course, it depends on the type of cask. And then I think one of the key things when you're sitting down and looking at what you're going to bottle on your next batch, there's a few kind of rules, I suppose, that I would always follow. You don't want to be repetitive. You don't want to be bottling the same distillery over and over and over. So, like if I've done a Glenburgie on this batch, it'll be another 3 or 4 batches before I do another Glenburgie, probably. And then in each particular batch, you're looking for a variety of different distilleries, different wood types, different ages, maybe even something peated in there as well, maybe a grain whiskey. So once you kind of put together all these guidelines, that kind of hones you in on a short list. And then you start looking at, right, we've got the short list. Let's see which of these casks in the short list are going to make it to the final selection. And that's when you start going in, trying them. And then you might hit something and think, right, on paper, that looked brilliant, but actually it hasn't done what we thought it was going to do during the maturation process. So you might think, right, that one's going to need a little bit longer, or actually that this is a good time to put that one out there. We don't want to overexpose it. But yeah, I'd say first couple of years, I'm happy to just pop them away and not give them too much thought at that point.
Would you use this cask again?
Probably, yeah. I'm being hesitant in that there's certain casks that I would definitely use again. If it was a sherry cask or a port cask, a Moscatel, I would use it again. I can't use them all again because you'd end up getting a release program that had too many refill casks. Yeah. And I just know that
it doesn't give the whiskey the flavour after its second 5 year. Yeah.
I'll be honest, Brian, and it's not. I don't think it's fair, but I think there is if you look at what we've got tonight, these are all first fill casks. If you have a refill cask that you're using for the second time, I do think the consumer looks at that and thinks, I'm not sure. Now, I think that's unfair because some of the refill casks are brilliant because you get a more subtle influence, which sometimes is better. but I wouldn't want to have refill casks dominating the releases that are coming out. So it's trying to find a balance, reuse some of them, but not all of them.
So,
This
not
one,
all of it.
question mark. I'd maybe use this one again. It's kind of, this Glenborgie might have taken a lot out of the wood on the first the first run. So that would kind of be a judgment call.
Yeah, you might see me swapping glasses because I've recently got new glasses because I realised I couldn't see the television. It was going blurred. I put the subtitles on. I'm going deaf as well, by the way. And at the minute, this is the first time. This is the first time I've used the glasses. At the moment, everything's blurred. At the moment, it's okay, and I just cannot get the in between. I thought Bobby Banford's first comment was this was his grandson's favourite whiskey, and I realised it was a comment on the tasting note. So sorry, Bobby. I thought you were teaching your grandson something that's maybe a bit early in life, but so if you see me doing this, it's just because I'm trying to get the balance of what we're doing.
Do you know what's weird, Brian? I actually noticed you doing that, and I didn't even think it was odd.
I know.
Which I think says more about you than it does anyone else.
Yeah, there you go. Sorted. All right, great start to the evening. If you go onto the QR code, folks, on the top right-hand corner, you'll get directly onto the product as well, so you can see what's happening. But yeah, great start, Alistair, as it was last week. So great. So
let's hit whiskey number 2.
Just for a second, do you show a different plane every time?
No.
It's the same plane.
Different planes cost a lot of money, so it's the same plane. And don't ask me what type of plane it is because I've got no idea.
Oh, it's a biplane. It's got 2 wings. It's
two wings. Aye, that's as much as we can get into.
I know. I think we're going to get a comment from somebody who'll come in there and go, "It's a boof douche model CDF 1980s, whatever it is." Anyway, I know as much as you as far as that's concerned. Okay, let's go into the second one then.
Okay, whiskey number 2, folks. Whiskey, as you can see on your screen there, but I'll hold it up anyway. Another 13-year-old, this time from Knockdhu Distillery, which is owned by Inverhouse Distillers, which is actually where my old man actually started his whiskey career, at Inverhouse Distillers at their plant over in Airdrie many years ago. And I remember it was quite funny. He used to always bring back these bottles of Inverhouse Green Plaid and Pinwinnie. And Pinwinnie, I loved Pinwinnie purely because Pinwinnie came in a little purple velvet drawstring bag, which was brilliant for keeping your marbles in your steelies in, and that's what all the kids in the street, we used to get these from my dad. And no interest in the whiskey, obviously, at the age of 7 or 8 years old, but the bag that the whiskey came in was brilliant for your steelies. So fond memories of Inverhouse. This Knockdhu, if you have a look at the colour on this is a bit of a giveaway. That kind of rose gold, pinky, coppery tone usually indicates that the whiskey has spent some time in a port cask, and indeed that is the case. A ruby port hogshead with this one, 13 years in total, 4.5 years in the ruby port cask. A big step up really from the Glenborgie, because we're moving from a traditional red wine to a fortified wine. Fortified, the key takeaway there is higher alcohol, more sugar, so it's a much bigger influence on the whiskey in a shorter period of time. Port cask, very fruit forward, peaches, clementines, strawberries, raspberries, red plums. It's port cask, especially ruby port. Tawny port, maybe a little bit nuttier, a bit drier, but a ruby port finish, big kind of frutella explosion. A couple of things I should mention about Knockdhu. It's quite an interesting distillery. One of the things is the naming. Inverhouse don't release this whiskey under the name Knockdhu. They release it under a knock. The official name is Knockdhu, but they changed the name of the releases because they thought Knockdhu and Knockandhu were too similar. So they did this to avoid confusion. So you have an unusual situation where the independent bottler is actually using the correct name and the distiller has chosen not to. Normally that might be the other way around, where we might not be allowed to use the official distillery name. So that's kind of odd. The other really interesting thing about Knockdhu is the fact that they use worm tub condensers. Now, I'm not going to get too geeky or technical, but you can either use a worm tub condenser, which is the more traditional method during the distillation process, or you can use a more modern and more common steel and tube condenser. Now, if you've got a copper and tube condenser, if you've got a tube condenser, there's a lot more copper involved in the process than there is with a traditional worm tub. And what copper does, copper removes lots and lots of sulfurs from the whiskey. So with worm tubs, you're actually not taking as much of that out. Sulfurs have a bit of a bad reputation in terms of creating negative components within the whiskey, but the reality is effectively there are good sulfurs. And if you leave the whiskey to mature long enough, they start to evolve and you develop a spirit that's heavy, weighty, complex, multi-layered. As I say, Knockdhu is one example. They also use these Benrinnes, Craigellachie, Mortlach, Glenelgin, Ardnahoe, the new-ish distillery on Islay. They were adamant they were going to put in worm tubs as their condensers. So it gives you a very specific, heavier spirit make that's quite different to the more modern approach. And I always think whiskies that come from that style of distillation are quite unique and quite interesting. And you do get a little bit of a kind of a vegetal funk on the nose here, which I would put down to those worm tub condensers. Brian, what's your thoughts on the Knockdhu? Oh, he's been and gone.
Yeah,
He's back.
Ta-da! I'm trying to get my glasses sorted out here, Alistair. I'm blind as a bat sometimes.
Trying to get my glass.
Yeah,
trying to get my glass sorted out.
No, I like this one. Did we not say last week we compared this to Mortlach? The one,
Yeah.
Mortlach had the worm tubs? No?
Mortlach at worm tubs. People always talk about Mortlach and having this meaty, savoury character.
Sort of,
yeah. The beast of Dufftown. And that's very much drawn from the fact that they use these worm tub condensers. I think we don't have it tonight, but I've bottled a few casks from Craigellachie, and I think it's a brilliant example of what worm tubs can do. You get this weird kind of hot dog sort of note that sounds odd, but actually kind of works. I think to me very very interesting and not that common with distilleries these days.
Are worm tubs traditionally inside the distillery? Because I think I remember going to Edgedower years ago, and they had a worm tub, and it was outside, and you could actually
normally
yeah,
outside. Normally outside.
normally outside.
Yeah, shoot, the tub itself is usually made of wood, and it's got like a copper coil
Yep.
that goes around the inside.
Mm-hmm.
But although they do use copper, it's a lot less than you get in these shell and tube
Yep.
condensers, which have got a
Mm-hmm.
huge amount of copper. What you tend to find is when if a distillery's been built in the last kind of 40, 50 years, if they were going for efficiencies or clean spirit, they would tend to go for these shell and tube condensers. And
Mm-hmm.
if a distillery was being modernised, they would normally replace the worm tub with the shell and tube. But I
All
think
right.
these days there's almost like a movement to go back to a more traditional production style. I mean, the other thing about Knock Do is it's wooden washbacks that they use, so everything they're doing there is like a throwback to the way whiskey was made,
Yep.
Decades ago. And I'm not saying one's better than the other, but I do find that because there's so few of them that do it, when you do get a distillery that uses a worm tub, it does create a very distinct type of spirit and whiskey.
I like your chunky. It's more sort of meaty. There's a bit more depth to it. There's a bit more mouthfeel. It sort of lingers a bit longer on the taste buds.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, shall we go on to whiskey number 3?
Yep. Just before we move on, have you tried out any port in a white port cask finish? Ruby, I mean, you've talked about Ruby, you've talked about Tawny. Have you ever had a white port cask?
I've not, Brian. Not through any. I'm not adverse to it.
Yep.
I think it would possibly take a bit more time, and it may not. Given that you're comparing it to a Tawny or a Ruby, you might be. I'm not saying you would be, but you might be disappointed. I'm not. It'd be an interesting experiment. It's kind of like what, for example, if you look at if you flip to sherry, predominantly we use Pedro Jimenez and Oloroso, but I have got a couple of casks that are in
Fino. Manzanilla. Yep.
Fino, and Fino's very light.
Yes. Doesn't give the same impact though, does it?
No, totally different. So the plan, I mean, the stuff that's in Fino has probably been in there for about 3 years now, and I haven't even looked at it. I've got a feeling that's going to be a long exposure to draw that whatever you're going to get from that cast.
The flavour and everything. Yeah.
But listen, everything's up for grabs. Anything we're allowed to use under the SWA guidelines, I'm kind of interested in doing it, because it's all about experimentation and trying different things out. I don't think you can make massive mistakes. I think you'll always get something that's got some merit to it. It just might not be everybody's cup of tea. Yeah.
No, just interesting. Yep. Okay, so we're on to Macduff.
Macduff. This is quite an interesting one to follow on from the Knock Do. I mentioned the fact that we have an unusual situation with Knock Do where the owners bottle it as a knock and it's actually called Knock Do. We actually come to a similar scenario with Macduff. Macduff is owned by Bacardi, very big company, and they actually don't bottle this very often. And when they do, it's normally released as either the Devon or Glendevron, because the distillery sits on the River Devon. So again, although it's officially Macduff Distillery, the actual bottlings that come from the owners are put out under a different name. Very, very odd situation. This Macduff here, 55.6%. 17 years old, so we're getting into some really good age territory in terms of the overall maturation period. This one's been in a Madeira cask, and it has been in there for quite a long time, 5 years and 4 months. Like the port, this is a fortified dessert wine. Very fruity, very tropical fruits. Probably get some Demerara sugar coming through there as well. But the prominent kind of flavour characteristics with Madeira cask tend to be tropical fruits, kind of peanut, walnut, bit of toasted oak. Very, very, very interesting flavour profiles that come through. And that kind of leads me nicely into the second part of the journey, if you like. Where did we get to? I'd finished up at Burn Stewart in 2003. And as I said, my old man was kind of plotting in the background to buy a distillery. Now, it's not something he could afford to do on his own. Fortunately, through his time at Burn Stewart, he had got to know a couple of guys in South Africa who were quite wealthy, and they were involved in the whiskey industry. And he kind of approached them and said, look, I think we could get together and buy a distillery. You guys will need to pony up the money. And he would offer the kind of the day-to-day expertise. This was 2004. So now around about this time, there'd been various mergers and acquisitions going on in the industry, and Chivas Brothers or Pernod Ricard, whatever you want to call them, had ended up with, I guess, a surplus of distilleries. And bear in mind, in sort of 2001, 2002, the single malt market wasn't as vibrant as it is today. So they'd closed down 4 of the distilleries, which were Benriach, Altabane, Capardonic, and Breval. They'd been mothballed. I mean, they weren't doing anything at that time. And my old man had approached them and said, look, you've got 4 distilleries here, not doing anything. Would you be willing to sell one of them? And they were like, which one do you want? Take your pick. And the reason that they opted for Benriach was that Benriach, although it was relatively unknown, it had this amazing inventory going all the way back to 1966. So there were casks in the warehouse for almost every year from 1966 up until 2002, when they closed the distillery down. And this is the thing: stock is always the key thing. A distillery is ultimately just a building in a location. What's in the warehouse is the really, really important part of it. So they were drawn to Benriach because of this almost 40 years worth of inventory. And why I kind of segued onto that part of the story with the Macduff being in the Madeira cask. One of the things we did at Benriach, we were really, really experimental in terms of wood management. We had other things going on there at the same time. You know, Benriach, as well as making a classic Speyside whiskey, double distillation, they were also doing experiments once a year with peated whiskey, and they were doing sporadic triple distillation runs, which is very, very unusual for any distillery in Scotland. On top of that, we were trying out all these different casks, whether it was, you know, sherry, port, Madeira, Moscatel, Marsala, rum, Barolo, claret, Tokai, virgin oak, a lot of stuff with virgin oak. So Benriach was really experimental. And because there was no expectation as to what Benriach should be, because, you know, it never existed as a brand. It was always a liquid that was going into blend. We kind of had a blank page to do whatever we wanted. And I reckon it was that experience of working with Ben Riach that got me really interested in the different things that different types of wood can do to a whiskey. The Madeira cask, Ben Riach was one of the early finishes that we did. Also, just want to touch a wee bit that period. You know, we bought Ben Riach in 2004. We were fortunate enough to be able to buy Glendronach Distillery in 2008, and then almost out of the blue, we picked up Glenglassaugh in 2013. And a very opportunistic purchase that last one. So over a sort of 12-year period, we had built up a portfolio of 3 different malt whiskey distilleries, but it was a brilliant time, especially the early days of Ben Riach. It was a brilliant time to be working in single malt. About 3 years before we bought Ben Riach, Brooke Laddie had become independent, and they were doing some amazing stuff. And you had other kind of small, independent, family-owned distilleries like Glenfarclas and Edgedower, Arran, Springbank, Tullibardine, just creating noise and making waves, and independent bottlers were becoming more prominent, especially, you know, the established players like G&M, Douglas Lang, Signatory, Cadenheads. So there was this whole movement developing. It was kind of pioneering stuff, and we were just kind of riding a wave at that point. We got in at a really good time with Ben Riach, managed to buy a distillery for, I suppose, quite a modest amount of money. Timing was very fortunate, and for the next kind of 12 years, it was just a brilliant experience. Glendronach was an amazing acquisition. It's only now that I kind of look at it as an outsider. I kind of realise what we had there. I don't think we realised quite, well, I personally probably didn't realise what an absolute gem Glendronach was until I actually was away from it. To me, one of the absolute top stellar distilleries, single malts in Scotland. Stunning whiskey, stunning distillery. It's to my great regret that we instigated a very strict program on the liquid when we bought Glendronach. It's going to be a longer story than I thought here, but Ben Riach's a big distillery. Ben Riach can knock out about 2.5 million litres a year, and we were running maybe at about 1.8 to 2 million litres, and that's a lot for a small producer. So we had a lot of filling contracts with other distillers, which is why we were producing so much liquid. When we moved forward to 2008, Glendronach's capacity is about 1.4 million, or it was then. I think they've expanded it now, but it was 1.4. We were maybe running it at about 800,000 to 1 million litres. So it was about half of what we were doing at Ben Riach. It was a more popular brand. So my old man made the decision on day one that we weren't going to do any filling contracts, and we weren't going to sell any casks to anyone, independent bottlers, brokers, other distillers. So effectively, he locked down the stock from day one, which is why today you very, very rarely see an independently bottled cask of Glendronach, which for me now as an independent bottler is quite tough to bear, because I'd love to bottle a cask of Glendronach, but it's so difficult to even find one for sale, and if you can find one, the price just becomes stupid, prohibitive. But it was a fantastic distillery. But then we get to 2015, 2016. We were approached by Brown-Forman, the company that owns Jack Daniels, and they were looking to get back into the Scotch whisky side of things. They had a brief flirtation with Glenmorangie, maybe 15, 20 years prior, and they wanted to get back into Scotch. And they had a look at what we were doing, and they fancied the whole shebang. I think my dad would happily have not sold, but they made him an offer that was too good to refuse, and the rest is history. So 2016, that relationship came to a close, and once again I thought, that's me. I might be done here. Need to try and figure out what to do next. So yeah, I guess it's up to the end of the Macduff. Brian, any thoughts on any of the last 10 minutes of rambling?
Yeah, I'm still trying to get my glasses together, if truth be told. You know what? I'm blind if I do this, I'm blind if I do that, and I do this. So I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow on my birthday, but one of the things I'm going to do is go to Specsavers and try and get another pair of glasses that I can actually look at a screen at arm length and realise it's not in Chinese.
Do you know, can you not get bifocals? Bifocals.
Yeah, yeah, that's what Mrs. Gibson said. Get yourself a pair of bifocals. So that's what I'm going to do. Yes, I got vanilla on this one. When I first nosed it and tasted it, I thought there was a bit of vanilla.
Yep.
When that, just as you say, the toasted oak, but aye. It's interesting, I have to say, when you talk about your old man, your dad, he's an icon in the whiskey industry. He is. And you just go, Dad, aye, fair enough. So he is. So he is.
No, honestly, Brian,
yeah.
it's funny. He wasn't always that well known. And I remember about a year ago, we were going to some black tie dinner in Glasgow, and I'd got on the train at my stop, and he was getting on about 20 minutes later. And we're sitting there, and I swear he paid this guy to do this. This guy came over and says to him, "Excuse me, are you Billy Walker?" And I'm like, "Oh, for God's sake!" He says, "I love your whiskies." And he looks at me and goes, "Your stuff's no bad either." damn with faint praise. Damn with faint praise. I think, you know, if you asked him, he'd probably say that a lot of this stuff happened by accident. You know, lucky, being in the right place at the right time. Ben Riek in particular was a, you know, that was just a moment in time where you were able to get access to something brilliant that didn't cost an insane amount of money. If you tried to do that 4 or 5 years later, it'd have been much more challenging. So yeah, he's done all right. He's done all right.
Yeah, I don't think you've done too bad. You've obviously learned a lot from your dad. The cast.
It's quite handy when you can just pick up the phone and say, look, because he's everything that you're coming up against for the first time, he's probably done it 12 times over, you know. Yeah. So there's very few issues that you won't have faced.
Skipping a couple of hurdles, speaking to your dad and trying to get things to that end result.
Yeah.
Anyway, which is good, but you've obviously learned a lot from your dad, because the whiskies you've got are exceptional. I mean, the way that you're finishing them and doing them. So
appreciate that. Appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what though, Brian? He still won't sell me a cask of Glenallachie.
Oh, I got one.
No, there you go.
I got a single cask.
All right.
What's you want for it? Oh no, I'm not going to tell you anything. See, me and your dad, we're like, do you know what, Alistair? I bloody well wish we were like that. I was bad, but anyway, I did get your attention for a second. Yeah, so we'll move on.
Yes, let's
number 4. Linkwood, absolute cracker of a dram.
Yeah,
absolute cracker.
So this is a bit of a crowd pleaser, I suppose. Linkwood's one of these brilliant distilleries that absolutely flies under the radar. It's a Diageo distillery. By the way, I have kudos to Diageo, because Diageo are although they are the biggest company in the Scotch game, and I know they're getting a wee bit of a doing on their share price at the moment, which hopefully is just a temporary blip. They are incredibly supportive of the smaller operators within the industry. They're really good to independent bottlers. Really fair in terms of what they make available, and the kind of prices they sell cask to people like me for. It would be very difficult to do this if you didn't have one of the big boys, willing to supply you with stock. So fortunately, Diageo are super in that regard. Linkwood's a great example of one of the malts that they're willing to make available to the indies. Partly because of the fact that the distillery is so massive. I think they can knock out about 5 million litres at full pelt, just outside Elgin. So it's a classic Speyside. It's a great liquid to work with. Seems to work very well with lots of different wood types. I mentioned this one's a bit of a crowd pleaser. This one, actually, one of the shorter. I need to just double check the. I'll get my glasses, which work. These are functioning glasses, Ryan. You need to dig deep, get some good glasses. One of the shorter finishes, 3 years in an Oloroso sherry hogshead. As I said earlier, we use a lot of Pedro Jimenez and we use a lot of Oloroso when it comes to sherry. And Pedro Jimenez, we do have a sensational Tianinic that we're going to look at. Pedro Jimenez is really heavy, super sweet. Oloroso, it's still dark, rich, but it comes down a level, a bit more manageable. You'll still get the raisins and the sultanas, but a little bit nuttier. And you can easily expose the whiskey to a longer time scale in Oloroso than you can with Pedro Jimenez. Lower sugar content than PX as well. The other thing I should mention about this, a lot of the sherry casks we use can be quite large, like puncheons or butts, which are sort of 500 to 550 litres, really big vessels. This one's actually been in a hogshead, which is 250 litres. So it's a smaller cask, less than half of the size of a puncheon. So you're allowing the liquid to interact with the wood more quickly, more aggressively, more frequently, therefore drawing more flavour out of that oak in the same period of time. But yeah, I say a crowd pleaser, full on sherry bomb, super easy to drink. 55.8%, but I don't think it comes across at all aggressively, which I always think is a sign of a good cask. Something I always noticed at Glendronach, where we were, dominated by sherry cask maturation. The single cask that we used to bottle there, always at cask strength, but there was never any fire, never any harsh notes, just really easy. Easy is maybe not the right word, but just like not difficult. You can tell that it was cask strength. So yeah, always a sign of a good whiskey.
Yeah, I love this one. I have to say, well, I've discussed last week, and I think everybody knows me as a PX freak, basically, anything PX. But I think we're talking about, if you look at cask samples, everybody would go for give somebody 5 samples and one of them's a PX, so automatically their eyes will get drawn to colour of the PX. But this excellent.
I was going to say, Brian, it's an interesting point about colour, and I think we're all guilty of it. you look at a whiskey, and the first thing you know before you taste it, the first thing you experience is the color, and you make a prejudgment of the liquid based in the color, and I think we all do it. I think it's weird that we do it because ultimately you haven't color and taste are not, you know, they're not the same thing.
Yeah. I think as everybody knows, particularly in the place, we are getting the exterior of the shop done out, which is caused us a bit of a headache at the minute. But one of the things we're trying to do is have an experience room, and what we're going to do with one of our whiskey tastings is, yes, you'll have a whiskey tasting, but we won't line the whiskies up like we normally do. Here's a glass, and here's 8 whiskies in a plastic glass. We're going to do a whiskey tasting with maybe 6 whiskies, and they're all in blue glasses.
Blue glasses?
Yeah, you can't see the colour of the whiskey. So it's a tasting glass like something like this, but the glass is blue.
Yeah.
You can't see the colour. So you're going to have to judge the whiskey by its nose and by its taste. No colour.
Yeah.
We'll see how that works out. Might be a hit, might be a failure, but it'll be an interesting experience. Might try it once, then never again. But anyway, it's something different that we're thinking of doing.
No, it's a good idea because, as I say, I think people do like a prejudgment based in the colour, and I guess you know your mind can be a complicated creature, and once you've got that prejudgment locked in there, you don't know what kind of unconscious bias it's kind of promoting as you then go to taste the liquid. So if you take that out of the equation, that's not a bad idea.
No, it's just something a bit different. People's opinions, and as I say, you say don't judge a book by its colour, but when people come into the shop and they want a whiskey, does it have a box? Yeah. Does it have a tube? Does it have a picture? Is it for a present? Yeah, but it's what's inside the tube and it's what's inside the box.
Yeah.
that matters at the end of the day. But as I say, you judge a book by its cover, but which I think, by the way, great concept. Infrequent Flyers with that sticks out like a sore thumb on the shelf. Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't have done it better myself, mate. Well done. Yeah.
High praise.
Right.
Right.
I found. Great. Softy.
Listen,
I think that liquid's an absolute belter.
Well, now for something completely different.
Can I just say, these are single casks.
Yep.
And I did take a note, so I'm going to backtrack for a second, Alistair. Let me just change my specs. The first one was 302 bottles, the Glenburgie. The Nugdew was 324. The Macduff is only 311 bottles. And this Linkwood 13-year-old is 337. And the Girvan 27-year-old that's coming up is 319. So, and also you'll see the different strengths from 58.9 coming down to 57, 55.6, 55.8. Particularly in the age of the whiskies, they still retain their alcohol quite well.
Yep.
And someone did comment, you'll love this one. Somebody, I don't know if I should say it.
No, go on.
Did say at the last whiskey tasting, these casks remind me of you, Brian. Well, they're quite tight. What? They're quite tight. Aye, they're not giving much away in the Angel's share, are they? Aye, I'll take that. But anyway, I think I'll pass that on. So, yeah, so this one, only 319 out the cask is Girvan.
Yeah, this is I always like to, if possible, include a a single grain whiskey in any tasting. I don't think a tasting is complete unless you can throw in a little grain grenade. And I say that because not everybody likes single grain whiskey. The whole process, it's like you're dealing with a completely different type of alcohol from single malt to single grain. It's a more industrial process. It's a different type of still. You use various different cereals, some malted, some unmalted. It's continuous. It comes off the still at a much higher alcohol strength. The whole profile of what you get right at the start is very different to single malt. It's not everyone's cup of tea, and I do think it needs time. Grain whiskies, to me, when they're young, they're incredibly aggressive, kind of designed to be like that. They need a lot more time than single malt to mellow out, get rid of the rough edges, start to truly develop their personality. I'd say 20 years plus is a good starting point. As Brian mentioned, this Girvan, or Girvan, as somebody called it at a tasting in Brighton. I think that's the posh, that's the Newton Mearns pronunciation, Girvan. This Girvan is 27 years, so it's got good maturity. Oldest whiskey we're going to look at tonight. And this one's been finished in a tawny port hogshead. So we had the Knockdo from Ruby Port, really fruity. And this one's been in tawny port, so the fruits are there, a bit drier, a bit nuttier, kind of walnut notes coming in there. Now, what's amazing, the nose on a grain whiskey, this could remind you of a misspent youth. There's an absolute aroma of marker pens. It's that kind of solventy, kind of chemical note. It's aldehydic. It's almost industrial. It's like almond, Battenberg cake, coconut. It smells like nail polish remover. Not sure how many of the audience use such a thing, but that's the aroma, which sounds odd, but actually it's quite pleasant. And then the other thing about grain whiskey, because grain whiskey's purpose in life really is to be a component of blends, and relatively the cheaper component of blends, the part that doesn't play as big a role, it doesn't always get filled into the best wood on day one, more likely to go into third, fourth refill casks. So really, it's when it gets into the hands of an independent bottler towards the end of its maturation cycle that independent bottler might say, do you know what, we're going to show this whiskey a little bit of love. We're going to expose that to a really interesting wood type that it normally wouldn't get access to. And this one we've popped into the tawny port for 3 years and 4 months. So suddenly you're taking that liquid that is now quite mature, developed quite nicely. It's got all those aldehydic notes, and you take those and expose them to a kind of nutty, fruity experience with a tawny port cask. And what you get is a really interesting combination. It's not everyone's thing. I think grains are really interesting, but they're very different. Some people love them. Some people, no, not at all. I actually had a customer who sent one of these back through another retailer we work with, said, oh, there's something wrong with the whiskey. At this point, I didn't know what the whiskey was. And I said to the retailer, what's the whiskey? They said, oh, it's Girvan. I said, right, so it's a grain. Yep. They said, what specifically? Oh, they said it tastes weird. I said, yeah, it does taste weird. It's grain. It tastes weird. So there was nothing wrong with the great comment there, like drinking a fruit salad. But yeah, that experience, that the person that returned that, obviously, and no criticism, but I don't think they'd been exposed to grain before, and what they were expecting was a 27-year-old single malt, which would have been completely different. So yeah, it's unique. It's a whole different thing. The other thing I want to touch on, there are only a small number of grain distilleries in Scotland, 7 or 8. They're generally massive. We talk a lot about single malt, but the blend in Scotch, and the biggest component of that is grain, so that you need a lot of grain. And Girvan can knock it, but I think the capacity is about 115 million litres a year, enough to do one of Brian's tastings, possibly. And even at that, it's not the biggest. Cameron Bridge is even bigger. So these are monumentally huge factories. When you think that Glenallachie, for example, might produce about 700,000 litres per annum, and this can do 115 million. It's a huge unit. So yeah, Brian, any thoughts on the Girvan?
Yes, I think the Girvan should have some peach with the fruit salad and the cream, to be honest.
Yeah.
Peachiness there, a bit of fruitiness to it. Absolutely.
Are you, Brian? Do you like a grain whiskey, or?
Well, I was not akin to not like it, but yes, as I've been trying more grain whiskies, I mean, particularly the value, age to price.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you can't beat it with a big stick.
Yeah.
It's value for money. It's just depending on people's concept of, it's a grain whiskey.
Yeah.
It's a blended whiskey. No, well, it goes into a blended whiskey. On its own, it's totally different beast, different character altogether.
Yeah.
And you just get this fruitiness to it. I mean, just what the guy says. I mean, you get fruit salad, you get peach, you get cream. You didn't get smoke or heatiness. Well, depending on what the age thing. But I think grain whiskey as a whole underestimated in a bottling.
That's a good word, underestimated, and
Yep.
maybe a little bit misunderstood.
Yep.
It's funny because it was never designed. It was really never designed to be consumed as a standalone drink. It was always meant to be part of something
a blend
else.
It was part of a pie instead of being the whole pie.
Yeah. Whereas single malt always had that dual role where it could be part of a blend, but it also had the ability to stand on its own merit.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas grain was never designed that way, and it's almost the fact that I've been able to buy some Girvan at 27-year-old is almost due to bad planning by the distiller, that they still had some of that liquid, kicking about at that age. Of course, you do. If you got a high age blend, you do need to have old grain, because ultimately the age is that of the youngest component. So they do need old grain for some of those higher end blends. But I think now people are starting to maybe pay a bit more attention towards it. As I say, I think they're really interesting. We don't do that many. There aren't that many distilleries to pick from, and they are a bit of a more difficult sell. But the flip side of that, as you said, is the value per age ratio is very, very positive when it comes to single grain whiskey. If this was a single malt, it would probably be 3 times as expensive.
Oh, easy.
So yeah, they're good bang for the buck, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, if that was a 27, 30, 35, 50, $1.5 grand.
Yeah.
A bottle.
Yeah. Big money.
It's frozen.
Can you hear me? We still
can hear you now. Yep.
okay.
Oh,
Did
yep.
it
Still
go a
right.
bit?
Was that you? Wait, were you just making a sound there?
This
Okay, all right, fine. Yep, you're live. Yep, we can hear you. Yep.
getting to that age, Brian, where you make strange noises, inadvertently.
Yeah, tell me about it. Yep. Same. I get my pension next week. My state pension.
Happy days.
Yeah, birthday tomorrow. Yeah.
So what are you doing to celebrate
I'm a leap year baby. So born the 29th of February 1960. So I'm actually tomorrow I'm 16 and a half.
16 and a half, eh?
Yeah, I've had 16 official birthdays and plenty of piss ups in between. So, yeah.
And what's the plan for tomorrow then?
Nothing actually. Got a wee delivery to do in Annan. Come back and then just have a relaxing day and just put my feet up. Normally do a lot of cooking, but tomorrow it's going to be a carry out. Just enjoy myself, and then on Sunday we'll recover from the hangover. I think.
Quite right.
At the end of the day, but yeah, I think as you say, grain whiskey underestimated. Some people hate it, absolutely hate it. Some people love it, but I think value for money. 27-year-old, great dram. And then we're on to Breval. This one's a different beast as far as bottles are concerned. There is 653 from this beast of a cask.
Yes, this was a big cask.
Yeah.
So the Breval, moving back onto single malt territory with Breval. So we have looked at the Linkwood was in an Oloroso hogshead. This one is an Oloroso puncheon. So it's the same type of sherry, but a much, much bigger cask. Puncheon's anything from 500 to 550 litres. So huge outturn. Breval, like the Glenburgie, owned by Chivas Brothers, Pernod Ricard, not a distillery that you see very often under its own steam. A couple of decades, maybe 3 decades ago, it was actually known as Braes of Glenlivet, and they changed the name to Breval to avoid confusion with Glenlivet. Was owned by Glenlivet anyway. So if you see Braes of Glenlivet and Breval, exactly the same distillery. And this one's been finished in Oloroso puncheon for about 2 years and 9 months. I actually think this one's got more of a wood influence than the Linkwood. Just edges it a little bit for me. Maybe slightly older, but it's been in the cask for a slightly shorter period, and it is a bigger cask. But to me, very autumnal dram. Some great dark chocolates and raisins, sultana, demerara sugars. Some nice kind of toasted nuts in there. Really, really interesting whiskey. Something I want to touch on as you savour the Breval. We've talked a lot about casks tonight and a lot about wood finishes, and that's a big part of what I do. The typical kind of process in terms we call it re-racking, finishing, secondary maturation, but typically what I will do when I buy some casks, normally you're buying a parcel of the same cask. So there might be 5 casks in the parcel, or maybe a dozen casks in the parcel. Same distillery, same wood type, same distillation date. The typical plan is to take those maybe set aside 2 or 3 of them and say, right, I'm going to keep those in the original wood. And at some point, they're going to be bottled without any manipulation or adulteration. And what that will give you is a bottling that reflects the distillery character. The rest, you might say, right, we're going to put them into a re-rack program. Some of this is going to go into sherry, some's going to go into port, some's going to go into Madeira, whatever it may be. And you're taking the whiskey on a different journey. I guess the whole point of that is that you're trying to build variety and be experimental. One of the biggest challenges when I decided to become an independent bottler in 2018, so we'd sold the BenRiach business in 2016. I'd kind of taken a bit of time out to try and figure out what to do next. And eventually I thought, right, I want to stay in the industry. I'm going to set up as an independent bottler. My old man had gone away and purchased Glenallachie at this point, and he said, look, you want to come and be a part of that project? And I was like, actually I'm going to try something different, because we had a good run with Glendronach and BenRiach, and I just thought there was a moment in time there where, like, if you don't do your own thing now, you'll never do it. And independent bottling, financially, the barriers to entry are quite low. You're not building a distillery, you're not buying a distillery. The challenge is you need to get access to casks, and that, certainly in 2018, buying casks was very difficult. The industry was booming. Distillers did not want to give up stock. They thought it was more beneficial to keep as much of their liquid for their own purposes. So availability of what you could buy was shrinking, and prices were going up. So I'm coming back to wood finishing in a minute. There's a point to this. You don't control a lot of things as an independent bottler. You don't know what casks are going to become available. You don't know what the quality is going to be. You don't know how much they're going to cost, and the future is always uncertain. So the one area where you can put your mark on the product is what you do with the wood management side of it. And it gives you a chance to influence the final product. It's really the one area where you can do that, is by taking the whiskey and putting it in a different type of cask and taking it in a different direction. So there's a big focus on that for me. Part of it's to do with what we did at BenRiach and Glendronach. But I want to tell you this story. It's a great story. I think it's a great story. And there's a point to the story that it's not a silver bullet. The cask finishing, it doesn't always work the way you would hope. So many years ago, I heard this story which I thought was possibly an urban myth, because it sounded too ridiculous to be true. It was either a Swedish or a German guy, two nations that are fanatical about whiskey. And this particular individual was a big fan of Bruichladdich, liked his Islay malts, loved Bruichladdich, but felt that it was a little bit on the lighter side of Islay, and wanted to kind of ramp up the maritime influence, if you will. And this was back in the days when you can still ship entire casks of single malt outside of Scotland without bottling them into glass in Scotland first. So this gentleman had bought a cask of Bruichladdich, bourbon barrel, and he'd kept half of the liquid in the original cask, but the other half he wanted to amplify. So he decided to transfer the second half of the liquid into an ex-herring barrel. You can imagine this oily, smoky, just really pungent, over the top. And he had a sense of humour, this fella. He called it fishky. Now, I was telling this story at a whiskey tasting in Berlin one night, and there was this wee guy in the back of the room with a beard. He was kind of smiling and winking at me. I was getting a little bit nervous, to be honest. And I thought nothing of it. The following day, we were doing this whiskey festival, and this same gentleman came up to the table, and without saying a word, he just popped 2 bottles on the table. One was the original Bruichladdich, and the second one was the Fishki. And he said, "There you go. It's a gift. It's a true story." And this was like 15 years ago. And I still have both of those bottles. And to this day, I have never had the courage to open the bottle of Fishki. So there's 2 takeaways from that story. One is you have to be really careful when you're selling cask to the Germans. You never know what they're going to do. And the second part of it is not every wood type that you expose the whiskey to is going to enhance the quality of the liquid. So you do have to be very careful what you're doing with it. Overall, so it was a pretty safe bet. I can see by the comments you seem to quite like this one. Classic Speyside, just under 3 years in Oloroso.
Yep. Absolutely fantastic.
You ever had the Fishki, Brian?
And no with chips and peas, no. I've had a fish cake, but not a fish cake, no. And the question would be why?
Yeah.
No, you never know until you try, but I do not want to.
Honestly, it's a little 20 cl square bottle, and it's sitting in my little bar downstairs.
Yep.
And,
is it starting to leak at all? Is it going through the glass? Or
it's I think it kind of underlines why the Scotch Whisky Association brought in rules about not allowing casks to leave the country, because you never know what people are going to do to them.
Yeah,
I don't think Bruichladdich were too happy about it.
No, but you know what? If it's in history, it's in history, and if it's a talking point, it's a talking point. You know.
Well, it's probably the only finish that Bruichladdich didn't do.
Aye. I think many years ago we had 23 different Bruichladdich. Many years ago.
It wasn't.
When you had the Lynx series and they had everything else and
Yellow Submarine.
Whatever. But I suppose they were experimenting though.
Yep.
In the earlier days. They were just putting it out there going, this is what we've done. What do you think? Yeah. So,
people loved it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was an interesting that was a brilliant time. When they were doing their stuff at the start of that project and for the next 6 or 7 years, there was that was a great time to be in single malt in general. There was so many great things happening. We had the same distributor as Bruichladdich in New York, so occasionally our paths would collide with Jim when he was on one of his kind of press trips. And you just got that little glow of celebrity, you know. Yeah. Just a wee bit of it rubbed off on you, you know.
Yeah. Did he end up standing on the table doing a toast and everything when he was doing
I don't think he ever stood on the floor.
Hey, you know what? Somebody told me he actually walked over to America over the water. I don't know if that's true or not. But he never took the flight. He just walked over the water with Jim.
A top guy.
Absolutely. A great guy. Absolutely. Yep. So we'll move on to number 7.
Yes. Let's hit number 7, which is another sherry bomb. This time from Kianinnick.
Yep, and this one is 314 bottles.
Yep. See what you think of this one, folks. 15-year-old Tianinic. So we're back into not much left in this bottle. We're back into Diageo territory. Another distillery that you don't actually see much of in terms of the official output. One of the things I want to mention here, this is actually from a Pedro Jimenez puncheon, and Brian just touched on the outturn 314, which would be very low for a puncheon. But what we've actually done here, we only bottled half of the cask. So we took about 50% of the liquid, sent it down to the bottler for bottling, and we kept the balance in the wood, and that will stay there for further maturation and be bottled at some point with a few more years on it further down the road. The reason for that is that we kind of got to a point that the last 18 months to 2 years, the market's been a little bit more challenging, and the really big casks were becoming a wee bit problematic just in terms of the sheer quantity of bottles that were being outturned. I've always worked on the basis that you're better having the whiskey sitting in wood than in glass. So if it's not going to move off the shelf quickly, you're better keeping it in wood. So we took the decision about 18 months ago to kind of step away from the really big casks, and if you do have a puncheon or a butt or a pipe, just take half of it and leave the other half in there. It's actually quite good because it gives effectively you see the two whiskies in two different scenarios, and it also means that you're not, this isn't completely gone forever. You've still got roughly half of it in your inventory that you can come back to further down the road, which is nice in the case of certain makes when you don't have access to a lot of stock. There's always this kind of, I think all independent bottlers suffer from this. If you have a make that is hard to get, I'm not saying Tianinic's hard to get, but say you had like a Ben Nevis that you didn't have a lot of stock of, and you were uncertain that you would be able to replace it further down the line. Once you get down to the last one or two casks of that make, there's almost a reluctance to bottle them. They might be brilliant and deserving of their time in the spotlight, but once they're gone from your inventory, they're gone forever. It's like my old man says, you can only bottle any whiskey once. So choose wisely in terms of cask and timing. I've just seen someone talking about a ginger beer finish. That sounds tremendous, but I don't think the overlords of Scotch whisky have signed off on that particular finishing style yet, but it does sound rather delicious. Where did I get to? So Tianinic, again, bit of a Diageo workhorse distillery. Finishing time on this one. This is quite hefty for Pedro Jimenez. I can never remember these things. 4 years and 10 months in a PX cask. So massive flavours there. Terry's chocolate orange, Cinnabons, molten Demerara sugar, thick, unctuous, viscous, heavy, everything you would want from a Pedro Jimenez cask. An absolute heavyweight of a whiskey, full on. Unctuous is one of my favourite words for whiskey. A great word. Should look that up in the dictionary. It's fantastic. So the great thing about PX, or certainly what makes it really interesting for whiskey, as well as being fortified, it's got an incredibly high sugar content. It's unbelievably sweet, and that all transfers through to the maturing spirit. I know Brian's a big fan of actual Pedro Jimenez sherry and drinks it on its own.
I never know.
To me, it's great for one. The sherry that is, but it's so heavy and sweet and indulgent.
I think you have to have a balance, as you know, you have to have a balance of, I think, the distiller's liquid to the wood finish.
Yeah.
So when the distillery manager produced this liquid, did he think, you know what, in 15 years this is going to be a belter in a PX cask? No.
No, he
He's
probably
thinking of the liquid, but you have to look at what the end result is of what you've got. And this is an absolute fantastic whiskey with being finished in the cask. Great. Yes, I've got a sweet tooth, but changing the subject completely for 10 seconds, I tried a 20-year-old bourbon cask whiskey. I won't name the distillery. And that just went woof, bang, wow. Changed my taste bud completely from PX to PX finishes to sherry finishes to wow, is this what a bourbon cask can do? But that's changing it completely to what we're talking about tonight. But yeah, I just think this is fantastic whiskey. Distillery, is it well known?
no, not at all. I mean, most of Tiananic, actually going to check it's quite it's not huge. It's just over 2 million litres.
You don't see much of it about, do you?
No, it's going into like Johnny Walker.
Aye.
There were plans a few years ago they were going to massively increase the capacity at Tiananic to make it like Rose Isle, so get it up to like 10 million litres, and purely to support their blend program. That's obviously gone by the wayside for the time being. It's not required, unfortunately. But it's one of those, like quite a few of the whiskies we've tried tonight. It's one of those ones that flies under the radar.
Under the radar, yep, absolutely.
Yep. Which is I would say about 80% of what I bottle probably falls into that category. Occasionally, we might get a bigger name like a Glenrothes or a Bowmore, or even, I don't know if Ben Riach's a big name, but we've done a few Ben Riachs, Ben Nevis, and it's always nice when you do one of those better known drams. But really, the bread and butter stuff is these kind of distilleries that people haven't really heard of or tried. Which is the essence of independent bottling. And I think what's become a bigger part of it over the last few years is the experimenting with the different wood types.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm just looking at the comment. A grapefruit sour beer cask finish with Ladeg or Leipzig, depending on your way of pronouncing. Yeah, that actually does suit. I love that whiskey, Leipzig Ladeg. When I worked, it's funny when I worked at Burn Stewart, we had Tobermory Distillery within our portfolio, and Leipzig was always the absolute jewel in the crown, between that Tobermory and Deanston, the kind of peated variant from Tobermory. We just never had enough stock to really do. They only made it for a few weeks a year, so we didn't have a lot of it, so we couldn't really do much with it. But it was always brilliant whiskey. But we'd never done anything wacky like a grapefruit sour beer cask finish. That sounds brilliant. I do think peated whiskies in particular are fascinating. In fact, this is a brilliant segue. It's like Simmy. It's like you've just teed me up here. I think peated whiskies are brilliant the way they work with certain wood types. It's the contrast of flavours that you get. So that takes us on to whiskey number 8. Would you believe it? Which is a peated whiskey, which has been finished in a Muscatel cask. So
I have to say it's very unusual, Alistair, for us to do. I remember your first comment last week. Ryan, every whiskey club in the UK, apart from you, do 6 whiskies. You do 8. Right? Yeah, well, that's just us. We're just different. We've always done 8 from day one, because the first supplier did 8 whiskies, and we've always done 8. But it's unusual, I have to say, that of 8 whiskies, only 1 is peated. Normally, you'll get maybe 4 or 5 that's not. One might be slightly, then the last 2 could be the slightly heavier peated one. But I think this is the exception to the rule, that only the last one was the peated one. And that's not a bad thing, by the way.
No.
Not a good thing, depending on your taste buds, obviously.
I think I always categorise the peated whiskies and the grain whiskies in the kind of industrial section of the library. So I think if we hadn't had the grain tonight, we might have gone with two peated. One of the big challenges for a lot of independent bottlers has actually been the ability to get access to peated liquid. Predominantly, it comes from Islay, and trying to get any of the Islay distilleries to sell you anything over the last few years has been quite hard. Kalila was the exception for a while, because Diageo, maybe up until about 2 years ago, Diageo were making Kalila quite readily available. I think they've turned the tap off a little bit on that one for the time being. But that was brilliant, because Kalila, I think, is a great Islay. It's balanced. It's not too peaty. It's not too iodiney. It still allows a nice underlying sweetness to come through. And it was quite fairly priced, so it was great to get that for a while. But if you're trying to Lafroy for a long time, almost impossible. Lagavulin, forget it. Kilcoman, hard. Bruichladdich, expensive. So that it's always been tough to get them, and actually, it's one of the reasons that you then start looking at other non-Islay distilleries that offer up peated whiskies, like Tobermory or Ardmore or Benriach, or the one we're just about to try, which is Glenturret. And this takes you into really different territory, because suddenly you're looking at a Perthshire mainland distillery that doesn't have a maritime influence on the whiskey at all. So you're it's all about the peat, but you don't have that sea salt, you don't have that iodine. So it's a more like heather focused, softer, maybe a wee bit more
subtle.
Yeah, a bit more subtle, not as in your face. Maybe more towards the smoke and less towards the iodine. And then you pop it in a Muscatel cask, and this one, incidentally, this has been in there for 5 years and 9 months. That's like a ridiculous length of time to be in a fortified wine cask. So, and what
do you want to explain what type of cask that is? When you're saying
Muscatel is it's like a Portuguese version of sherry.
It's quite a sweet. It's sweet.
Yeah, it's the closest thing you would compare it to would be Pedro Jimenez, but it's not as sweet as Pedro Jimenez. But in terms of a Portuguese fortified dessert wine, that's the kind of ballpark. So, as I say, not as big as PX, but those big chocolatey, brown sugar, raisiny coffee notes that you would get. bit fruity as well, maybe some marmalade, some citrus, some kind of bitter orange in there. And so you get all those kind of sweet notes and those fruity notes combined with like this savoury, smoky character. It's like sweet and sour, barbecue. It's that contrast of influences that I think is why a peated whiskey with a really sweet cask gives you a really interesting whiskey.
Yeah.
And again, the other thing that this is called Rued Moor, which is the peated whiskey that they make at Glenturret. And I see Simmy saying Glenturret are stopping peat production, aren't they? Which is 100% correct. I guess they want to go down a really focused route with the non-peated stuff, which is fair enough. The reason I'm sure many of your guests tonight have probably been to visit Glenturret, especially when it was the famous grouse visitor experience. It was quite a big thing, and the reason that they make peated whiskey at Glenturret was for a peated version of famous grouse that they brought out a few years ago called the Black Grouse. So they needed the Black Grouse. They needed a peated component to put in the blends, so they started making it at Glenturret. So that's the kind of history behind why it exists. I think it's a shame that it won't continue. I only ever managed to get like 4 casks of this. I think I've got 2 left. I would have happily have bought more, but Glenturret is a very small distilleries, and they're just not going to sell much. But this in particular, I think, is a really nice style, the peated liquid that they produced there. And as I say, it's a bit different. It's not Islay, so it's not exactly what you would expect when you talk about a peated whiskey. And I think it just works brilliantly with this Muscatel cask.
TCP and iodine, and
yeah,
you say it's gentle smoke.
Yeah. And listen, nothing against that whole TCP iodine thing. You know, it has its place for sure.
I'm sure it has somewhere. Aye.
I know a lot of people go 2 ways on it. You know, it's like Marmite. So yeah, but listen, Brian, I want to tell while people are still on that, I want to squeeze in the story we finished on last week because it's one of my favourite stories from the last 20 odd years. So one of the great things about working in the whiskey industry is sometimes some very unusual circumstances transpire and you meet some interesting people. And a few years ago, when I was working with Ben Riach and Glendronach, we you all know obviously who Donald Trump is. He's such a popular individual. Anyway, before he had aspirations to be the president of the United States, he, as I'm sure you know, he was building a golf course up at the Many Estate in Aberdeenshire, and one of the things they wanted to do was to get a local distillery on board to bottle up a whiskey for the golf course. So they were looking at Glendronach, Glenfarclas, Glengarry, probably 1 or 2 others. And I was asked to go up for a meeting with the woman who was organising the whole shebang. She was based in Scotland, but Donald Trump Jr., one of the sons, was coming over and they said, look, can you come up and have a meeting with Donald Trump Jr.? And I thought, okay, interesting. I've seen the guy on the TV, bit of a Wall Street guy, sharp dresser. I thought I better dig out the old suit, shirt and tie for that meeting. So I go up to Aberdeen and go into the office, and Donald Jr.'s sitting there, casual as you like, jeans, boots, t-shirt, baseball cap, and I'm thinking I'm completely overdressed here. Anyway, we had a chat about the whiskey project, and I thought nothing of it. Didn't really expect anything to come of it. So a couple of months later, I was actually away on holiday, and I got an email from the work saying, look, golf course people have been on saying, do you want to Donald Trump's going to be coming over in 6 weeks, and can you go up for a meeting? And I said, but we already met with Donald Jr. Why do we need to see him again? And they said, no, it's the real one. It's Donald Senior. I was like, all right, okay, that's interesting. So I checked my diary and I was like, I actually can't go. I've got a work trip in America. I can't make it. So I said, look, I contacted them and said, look, I can't come to this, but I'll send my dad, who was running the business. And the woman I was dealing with, she didn't really know much about whiskey, to be fair. Why would she? Wasn't her area. So she didn't realise that my dad was the guy that owned the company and was running the company. So she says to me, what do you mean you'll send your dad? You can't just send your dad. And I said, why not? He's sending his. So anyway, my dad went up and met him. Long story short, we did end up doing a bottling of a 1985, I think it was a 25-year-old Glendronach single cask for them. We did one bottle and that was it. Things kind of over the next year or two, there was a lot of let's say negative PR, I think, around the golf course, because Mr. Trump was getting involved in various arguments with Alex Salmond and the guy that had the house in his golf course, and we just thought it might be a tactical, strategic maneuver to kind of finish on one bottling and leave it leave it at that. But yeah, it's funny. It's funny how these things crop up. And listen, it was a great whiskey. I think they're a little bit expensive if you want to buy one online, if you can find one. But certainly one of the more unique and rare bottlings that we did during my time at Glendronach. So yeah.
Super story. Brilliant.
Well, got to say no to the future president of the United States. Sorry, I'm busy. I can't make that meeting, but I'll send my dad.
A lot of folk would say no now, to be honest. But anyway, it is what it is. So, what's the future plans then, Mr. Walker? Anything major in the pipeline, or?
Well, it's funny. Actually, I'm just working on we've got a new release, batch 20 of Infrequent Flyers. We'll be launching in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm actually currently working on the next bottling. I was signing off the label artwork for this is an April bottling, and I noticed we're getting very close to cask number or our 200th release. So. That's number 2. That will probably be part of batch 22, which will be bottled around about September. So I have to start giving a little bit of thought as to something special that could be number 200. It's a funny one. That it's a bit of a. I do remember when I set the business up in 2018, and you go to company's house and you pay your 13 quid, I think as it was then, and you say, right, that's me, I've got my own business, I'm an independent bottler. How many casks have you got? None, de nada, zero, zilch, nothing. So you start off with no whiskey, and I never thought I'd own 200 casks, never mind bottle 200 of them. So it's a nice milestone to get to.
Yeah, well, let's think about this. So, would that be available at our Grandbusters Whiskey Festival or the Whiskey Club?
Sure, yeah, well, yeah,
in November next year, and the
plan this year. The plan for the September bottling would be to release it around about October. So yeah, it should be on the cards by November.
By November, great. Absolutely, don't want to spoil it, but that would be great.
But I genuinely, it's one of these ones where I haven't actually identified anything for that. I've got the cask picked for the April run, and we'll do 2 bottlings this year. and September's wide open. That's one of the things I need to sit down and have a wee look at, and that's that 200th release is going to be in there somewhere. And it's one of those ones trying to, when we did the very first cast we bottled was, let me just plug my laptop in. One of the very first cast we bottled was a Glenkeith 26-year-old, and when we got to number 100 was a 25-year-old Bowmore in a PX cask. So now it's trying to identify something for.
Yeah, okay.
Aye. So
interesting times.
Indeed.
Well, thank you for your time. It's been absolutely fantastic. Great.
Thanks for having me.
Aye. Particularly from, well, I have to be honest, from a few Timmy and Simmy and Bobby Banford doing comments. It's great to be interactive. It's great if more people are interactive because it just gets comments and things flying. But it's been absolutely fantastic over the last 2 weeks to do it. So, as you were aware, we do a raffle, and last week we did a previous link week in the raffle. This year, and you did bring it up. So we're doing a Craigallachie distillery bottling for this raffle. So bear with me, everybody, before we do the raffle. Just to let you know, we've got 3 bottles of this. Retails at 75 quid. So we've got this one to do. But first of all, thank you very much, Alistair, once again for doing it. Somebody actually saw a private message me and said, why don't you do a ABTW? Alistair and Brian talk whiskey.
Alistair
then the comment came, why do ATBTP? Alistair and Brian talk. You never finished the P.
Yeah. No. I think option 2 is way more accurate.
That's it. You can watch us live, ladies and gentlemen, every Friday. ABTW.
Oh, I like that. Sound effects. That's good.
Aye. That's why I'm avid. Oh! Brilliant. What? Anyway, great to see you again. I haven't seen you for a while, but you know what? Twice in 2 weeks. Enough. Anyway. We'll do the raffle in a minute, and if you can just stay in the background, we'll come back and have a wee chat.
Yep.
After Alistair. Anyway, great for you to spend 2 Friday nights of your time with TB Watsons and our members. It's very, very much appreciated. So we'll come back to you in a couple of minutes if that's okay.
Yeah, I'll be here.
Great, thanks. So, if Mrs. Gibson would like to come over and we'll do a wee raffle. We've got 3 bottles of this limited. I'm going to have to put other specs on, folks. Craigallachie Distillery, only 220 bottles, and we have the last 3 to give as a prize, 75 quid a bottle to everybody who has purchased raffle tickets. Best of luck. For those who haven't purchased raffle tickets, do it next time because you can't win it if you're not in it. There we go. First one out is 127. 127. Okay. Okay. Next one. 62, 62. And the last one is 39. The reason we only have 3 raffle prizes is 1, the price, and 2, only the people who have bought the raffle tickets. So the more people that buy the raffle tickets, the more prizes. But in this instance, less people buying raffle tickets, and whiskey is more expensive. So that's why we've only got 3 prizes. Phenomenal prizes, by the way. So, on behalf of Karen and I, and the staff of TB Watsons, and we look forward to seeing everybody once the scaffolding is down in our shop. It's been a bit of a long slog. We'd like to see everybody in the shop. We have got other whisky tastings and barrel top tastings lined up. You will get informed about that. But I think if Alistair, if you're still there, yep. I think on behalf of both of us, again, Alistair, thank you for your time. On behalf of both of us, thank you for supporting TB Watsons. Thank you for supporting Infrequent Flyers. You'll have a great weekend, particularly with my birthday weekend. Don't think about me at all. Just enjoy yourselves. Yeah, ripe old age of 66. Pension coming. The only thing I can say, and hopefully we can do it, is our financial year end tomorrow, Saturday, 28th of February. If you're going to place an order, could you please place your order tonight or tomorrow morning to help our financial books of sales to get the sales process, so we then can give Alistair an order for March. But on behalf of Karen and I, thank you. He wants me to get off, by the way. That's how it's going. Get off the screen. So, thank you. Enjoy your weekend, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Thank you.